So K-pop is popular in Japan, but the opposite is definitely not true. J-pop is barely recognized in Korea. Why isn't J-pop big in Korea when it's so close to the country? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So if you go to Korea today, the music scene is pretty much filled with K-pop, K-ballads, K-indie, and K-hip-hop. As for foreign music, Koreans love American music. J-pop, on the other hand, is virtually non-existent in the country. So when a lot of these Japanese stars do visit Korea and perform, they're often relegated to perform at small pubs, small dance floors, or very small concert venues. And as I mentioned earlier, much of the Korean public just doesn't know J-pop in general. For instance, when R&B singer Crystal K visited Seoul years back, only my friend and I recognized her. Other popular acts such as Orange Range had to perform in a small dance floor, which only housed about 100 to 150-ish people. E-Girls, one of the most popular J-pop acts and known for their slick dancing, was barely recognized and cheered on at all at the Asia Song Festival in Busan. And even top J-pop or J-rock acts aren't excluded from this, as Perfume and One Ok Rock visit Seoul every once in a while. They too were relegated to small concert venues, ones that hold up to around 800 or so people, where big acts such as Perfume have performed in front of 50,000 or more people in Japanese dome tours. Heck, even taking this out of J-pop for a bit and going to Seoul's biggest anime convention, Seoul Comic World, they would actually be playing J-pop. Well, since an anime con is all about, well, Japanese pop culture. But nope, instead, they were playing A-Pink's Love. No J-pop was heard playing there. Now, I would say the only fans that know their J-pop in Korea are the hardcore ones and K-pop idols. I remember going to the Seoul One Ok Rock concert several years ago, and I was sitting next to none other than FT Island. And those guys love One Ok Rock. In fact, unexpectedly meeting FT Island right next to me was pretty cool as well. And in a few seats back, who I didn't get to talk to, were some of the members of 2PM. So it was pretty cool to see some K-pop stars, since they do perform in Japan, that appreciate Japanese music. So now to the big question, why isn't J-pop big in Korea? Well, there's several reasons. Let's get onto them. So the first one is the long Japanese ban and censorship. So after World War II in 1945, Korea was split into two. And right after the war, South Korea imposed a ban and censorship on many of Japan's pop culture exports. And this is very understandable, as Korea was very mad and angry and resentful for Japanese colonialism from 1910 to 1945, as well as its past decades-long history. So the pop culture exports that were banned included manga, anime, music, and Japanese dramas. Japanese pop culture that did make it into the country, such as manga, had their art heavily altered and the Japanese names changed to Korean names. So any art that would even remotely be translated into pro-war or Japanese imperialism was quickly removed for the Korean versions. As for the characters' names, all of them went from Japanese to Korean names. And one big example of this is the 90s iconic manga Slam Dunk. So let's fast forward 53 years later into the 90s, October 1998 to be exact. After this long period of censorship, Japan starts to ease up on its ban. 6 years later, in 2004, Japanese movies are allowed in Korean theaters for the first time, and Japanese video games can be sold at Korean game stores. But there were two big bans that were still in place: the ban on Japanese music and Japanese dramas. In fact, these bans are still largely in place. In 2014, there was a crayon pop song called Ui that was banned by KBS for having the Japanese word pika pika in it. In fact, the only times you might hear Japanese music in Korea are either in restaurants, particularly Japanese restaurants, or on the radio. Hearing J-pop anywhere else in Korea by mainstream media is pretty much non-existent. And since from 1945 to 1998, there was a big 53-year gap on censorship, it missed some of the most iconic singers during that stretch, including Japanese city pop. J-pop also has this huge stigma against it. J-pop is closely related to J-idol music, and they're actually quite different, because when non-J-pop fans think of J-pop, they probably think of Morning Musume or AKB48, something like this. But more standard J-pop looks something like this. Now, to many people that's not used to J-idol music, it's a bit strange to Korean ears, as well as overseas fans' musical tastes. They're not used to that quirky J-pop sound. Most Koreans that I talk to think that J-pop has this anime-ish, maid cafe, idol cute sound, or think that their image is way too childlike. So since the J-idol scene is closely related to the J-pop scene, as most Koreans can't get behind that. And I have to admit, the J-pop / J-idol stigma is hard to get over. It's a tough obstacle for most non-J-pop fans to get over. Moving on, J-pop's dance and singing abilities aren't to the standard that K-pop's is. Now don't get me wrong, there are Japanese idols that can sing and dance with the best of K-pop idols, such as Twice's Momo, who's considered one of the best dancers in K-pop today, came from the Japanese music scene, as well as AKB member Matsui Jarina, who was a contestant on Produce 48, and before she dropped out of the competition, she was considered one of the aces on the show, one of the trainees that had a high approval ratings from Korean judges, and one that could have possibly made IZ*ONE. So the talent in J-idol music is definitely there, but for the most part, in the J-idol scene, their singing and dancing abilities aren't there. They're definitely not up there with K-pop. And one stark example is this is the competition show Produce 48, where they had Japanese and Korean contestants compete to make it into the final group IZ*ONE. And one of the judges, renowned choreographer Bae Yoon-jung, actually commented on the stark difference, the vast gulf between the Korean trainees and Japanese trainees. Bae Yoon-jung actually asked some of the members of AKB48, perhaps the most popular J-idol group, how did you even perform? How did you even make your debut? I'm asking because I'm curious. You cannot perform on a stage the way you just did. And this was a stinging blow for some of these AKB48 trainees, as they're really popular in Japan, but in Korea, the standards set to a whole new level. And this shocked Bae Yoon-jung. She knows the entry to getting into K-pop, just debuting as a group, is very rigorous. So when Bae Yoon-jung puts the standard here, but a lot of the skills of the J-pop idols are down here, it looks pretty bad. Thus, standards like Bae Yoon-jung actually spilled over to the average Korean fan standards. And this vastly differs from J-pop, where in J-pop, you pretty much debut with little to no training at times, and you're very raw, you're pretty much unpolished, but over time, you get better and better until you become a legitimate, polished J-pop star. But to a lot of K-pop fans, it's a lot different. The average fan wants to see a slick, polished group by the time they debut, and that's a huge reason why K-pop trainees, on average, train from anywhere from 2 to 6 years, because by the time they debut, everyone expects them to be good. So when you take a J-pop group that's not that good when they debut for their first year or two, a lot of Korean fans, as well as overseas fans, are basically saying, we don't got time for that. We want to see something good right away. Another one is the sound and style. You got music such as K-pop, British music, and American music that are all similar in sound and style. And K-pop, especially within the past decade, borrows even more heavily than before from American music, but with Korean lyrics. And there's nothing wrong with that. K-pop sounds very good, but with J-pop, it definitely has that different sound. Have you ever heard the sayings, that sounds like an anime intro song? Or, that sounds very J-poppy? Well, there's reasons why people say that. It's because J-pop has that unique sound. It has that distinct flavor. But as I mentioned earlier, it's an acquired taste as well. Not to mention that J-pop, while yes, also very influenced by American music, Japan has this way of taking foreign concepts and making it their own. So they took American pop and rock, for instance, and they definitely owned it. They definitely put a Japanese flavor and sound to it. Now we gotta move on to the few Japanese concerts in Korea. As mentioned earlier, any J-pop or J-rock acts that do make it to Korea perform in pretty small venues. In fact, the last big J-pop act that I can remember that was pretty big in Korea was back in 2008 during the Arashi concert. But by 2010, as K-pop started to explode and J-pop started to decline in the world, fewer J-pop acts visited Korea. In fact, one of the most popular ways that Japanese artists perform in Korea these days are in music festivals, where they perform either with Korean music acts or they perform with Asian music acts. And one example is the Asia Song Festival, which happens in Korea every year. In the past decade, there hasn't been much demand for J-pop acts in Korea. Now in previous videos, I mentioned that J-pop is more FUBU, for us, by us. Like the clothing brand, they pretty much stuck within their own country. But in recent years, Japanese music labels, perhaps seeing that K-pop is so big in the world today, has started to move outside of Japan. But a lot of Japanese music artists, as well as labels, privately said for years that Japan needed to move out, but for some odd reason, they weren't. Take Produce 48 and IZ*ONE member Miyawaki Sakura's words. She pretty much saw Japan's reluctance to going overseas for a long time. As she says, it's frustrating to see that Korean idols do well, but once we step off our home ground, Japanese idols cannot get such recognition. So if Japan is moving out more and more, where are they going to? It's definitely not Korea. And yep, they're not going to Korea. Instead, Japanese music acts are going to places that they were once popular in Southeast Asia. Places such as Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Japanese acts have also been going to the US, where there's several Japanese acts that have a strong following in the country. Acts such as Kiri Pamu Pamu, Baby Metal, and Perfume all have sizable followings in the country. J-pop labels also had to get creative with their strategy, as they know that K-pop with that Western sound and that slick dancing can dominate most countries these days. And one cool strategy that J-pop labels are doing is actually tying themselves to anime conventions, because in anime conventions, there's a special type of fan, the anime K-pop fan. Because unlike a lot of the newer K-pop fans, anime K-pop fans first got into J-pop and J-rock in the 2000s. But deep down, many of these anime K-pop fans still like J-pop. They still know their Asian music roots. So while you'll have these fans listen to K-pop acts such as BTS, Twice, and Monsta X, they also devour Japanese pop culture and open to it. As they watch stuff like Demon Slayer and My Hero Academia, they're very open to also going back to J-pop and J-rock. So it's a smart move what these Japanese music labels are doing. So taken all together, J-pop didn't make a scratch in Korea because of the long ban and censorship. But while J-pop didn't make it in Korea, there's a lot of J-pop influence that you'll see in K-pop today. And you don't have to look far for Japan's influence, as you can see it with Twice, IZ*ONE, and Produce 48. So thank you for watching this video, and I'd like to know your take in the comments below. And if you guys want real talk from a K-pop journalist that used to work in Seoul, then please download my free ebook below. And with that being said, I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy, guys.